I can't believe how shocked and angry I was when I moved to Utah and realized how much my utilities were. Now, I'm gonna walk you through the actual cost of living in Salt Lake City. We're gonna look at my house, my utilities, my insurance bills, right? All these things so that you can be better prepared of what to expect if you're gonna move to Utah. But instead of just talking about things in general, like gas or bread or a gallon of milk, I wanna focus on those things that are gonna be a lot more expensive, that really vary throughout the country. Now take it from me, I've lived all across the United States, from Oregon to California, to Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, and now here in Utah. And there's some major differences of the cost of living in Utah compared to other places in the country. Now, of course, if you find this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I post weekly videos on here on everything to expect if you're thinking about relocating to Salt Lake City. So let's dive into it. So this is one of those videos you want to get a pen. You're probably going to hit pause a couple of times as I'm going through this. I really want you to take notes, pay attention, and of course, if you have any questions about what it's like to live in Utah, reach out to me. My contact info is below. All right, let's dive into utility bills. This is one of those questions I get from especially my first-time home buyers, or people that maybe aren't familiar with Utah, haven't grown up here, maybe don't have family here. People are always curious how much utilities typically cost. So like I said, we're gonna use my house as an example. I'm gonna show you real life numbers, usage. Now, as an example, I'm a 2-adult, 2-kid household. So me and my wife and our 2 kids, it's about a 3,000 square foot house in Sandy. So right off the bat, a couple things to remember here. Your utility bill is often closely associated with a couple key factors. Number one, how big is your house, right? If you have a 5,000 square foot house, then your utility costs are obviously gonna be much higher than if it's a $2,000 house. And even sometimes the location where you live could make these vary a bit, right? If it's an older home, maybe it doesn't have the high energy insulation, or it's not a newer home, and it has a bit more air gaps in the ventilation system, things like that, then of course you could be losing some efficiency there and your bills might be a little bit higher. And of course, it's gonna depend on how frequently you're using these things, right? If you're cranking the electric bill, or the AC, then your electric bill is going to be really high. So keep those things in mind. This is just an example of kind of what to expect. But now you know this is based on a single family home in Sandy, roughly 3,000 square feet. All right, now the power bill here was something that I wasn't quite used to, specifically the gas bill. So if you're unfamiliar, Utah kind of has natural gas furnaces for heating your home, and then electric AC units for cooling your home. Now, when I moved here from North Carolina, I didn't have a gas bill. Everything was central heating and cooling. So I had a little bit higher electric bill, but I had no idea how much natural gas actually cost. Something interesting about Utah is the natural gas here is actually a little bit more plentiful. It's like easier to get to people. It's probably the best way to say that. So your gas bill might actually be lower if you're used to having a gas bill maybe somewhere on the East Coast. All right, so I'm pulling up my Enbridge gas. It used to be called something different, but Enbridge is now the primary natural gas provider here in Utah. So the first thing I want to point out is I pulled up an annual billing cycle here for the last 12 months. So right now we're like summer, it's like June, July of 2025, and this is going back really the last like 2 years. The first thing you'll notice is, man, that thing really peaks during certain times of the year and is super low other times of the year. So you would imagine, obviously for natural gas, you're cranking your heat in the wintertime because, I don't know, it snows in Utah apparently, and you're gonna want your house warm, right? Whereas in the summertime right now, I'm barely using my furnace, if at all, and so my gas bill is super low. Now, if you have like a gas range in your kitchen, or maybe fireplaces that run off natural gas, then sure, maybe you're still using more gas throughout the year. But primarily, you're gonna notice a really high gas bill in the wintertime and a super low electric bill, vice versa, if that makes sense. So just look at some specific examples here. You'll see like this past like winter of 2024, you'll notice that as soon as like November hit of 2024, started to go up. December, January, February, when it's really the coldest of the year, You know, I was somewhere between like $200 to $250 a month for my gas bill. The previous year, I don't know what was going on. It was even higher. I even had one gas bill that was over $400 in a single month, which is crazy. But then you'll notice in the summertime, like July, August, September, it was super low. It was between like $25 maybe to $45 a month. Now I'm gonna switch over to Rocky Mountain Power, right? So now we're looking at the electrical bill, and it's basically the exact opposite, where again, here's the last like 12 months. You'll see that now in like June of 2025, it's starting to go back up because we're obviously cooling our house with electricity. We're running the AC every day, you know, when temperatures are in the 80s, 90s, and sometimes we'll even cross 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the Salt Lake Valley. You're obviously cooling your house, right? Even when you're not home, you might have pets, and so your AC is pretty much on like 24/7. Maybe you can turn it off at night, but certainly throughout the day, your AC is pretty much on. So you'll notice here that it's starting to pick back up as we get into the hotter months, whereas back in the wintertime, it was much lower. Now, we're still using electricity more often besides cooling, and so you'll notice that the highs and lows aren't quite as extreme as the gas bill, but nonetheless, it's gonna be much higher in the summertime. Okay, I'm gonna specifically pull up my billing history to give you an idea of exactly what to expect with your electric bill. So I'm gonna go back and just show you January 2025 to kind of where we are now in the summer of 2025. And you'll notice, all right, so my February bill, which was for the month of January, was about $114. And then the next month, $117. The next month in like March, $107. And now it's up to like $204. So it's obviously going up as we get into the summer months. So if you want to be conservative, maybe you're averaging somewhere between $150 to $200 a month for electric. And for your furnace, it can vary quite a bit, but you can kind of see those two combined. You're probably looking at roughly $200 to $300 a month, maybe even more, just for electric and gas. Now, water is kind of interesting because that one doesn't really just have one monopoly company like you would see Enbridge or Rocky Mountain Power. Your water really varies by the district that you're in. Even within one suburb, you might have different sources of water, sewer, and trash. And oftentimes, some of those bills are actually wrapped together. So like my trash and sewer bill is actually one bill versus my water bill is its own separate bill. And even within one township like Sandy, you could have different sources of where the water is coming from. It could be White City Water, which is sort of a different utility municipality than like Sandy City Water, right? So what's interesting is I've found my water bill to be fairly consistent throughout the year with the exception of summertime. My water bill typically averages around like $25 to $30 a month. It's actually way less expensive than other states where I've lived previously. And my trash bill is the same pretty much every week. In fact, I think they bill it on a monthly or bi-weekly basis, and it's somewhere around $30 to $35 a month. Now, what's interesting is depending on where you live, sometimes your HOA will include some of these utilities. So before I jump fully into HOA, just note that your sprinklers is probably the one thing that will cause your water bill in Utah to skyrocket. So here's my little pro tip that I promised at the beginning of the video. Make sure that your water sprinkler is working correctly and that your sprinkler heads aren't broken. The first summer that we lived in Utah and owned a home, my water bill shot up out of nowhere. We're talking like over $150, $200 a month because I had broken sprinklers that I wasn't aware of, and it was just spewing water in my yard and I didn't catch it in time. So pro tip, when you're buying a new house in Utah, because the grass can die so quickly because it's a hot, dry environment, you want to make sure that you're watering your grass, but also paying attention to your water bill. All right, now let's dive into HOAs. And to be honest with you, I still don't know how I feel about homeowners associations. Part of me thinks it's a complete waste of money, and other times I see communities that have really cool amenities. Now, I'll make the argument that the HOAs in Utah are a lot better than HOAs in some other states. For example, in Florida, I've seen some outrageous HOAs where you're paying like $1,000 a month and you're really not getting anything for it. other than like maybe a gated community. I will say that the HOAs in Utah, they correlate very closely with what you're actually getting. So if it's including more of your utility bills like water, sewer, trash, then it's going to be a higher number. If it's not including those utilities, it's going to be a much lower number. The extreme example is a place like Daybreak. Now, if you've never heard of Daybreak, you should probably go check out my videos. I've done several of them about the Daybreak community, one of the most popular areas that people want to live, but also has one of the highest HOAs in the entire state. The caveat is you're getting way more for that HOA because of all the amenities that you can expect in Daybreak. Now, a lot of you out there might be similar to me in that you don't necessarily want to pay extra for an HOA, but if it's including some of these utilities like internet or water that you're going to pay for anyways, and it's a pretty comparable price, then it's probably okay. Now, here's something that they don't tell you until it actually comes time to make a purchase. If you're buying a house in Utah with an HOA, you're almost always going to have to pay what's called a transfer fee. Sometimes they'll call it like a reinvestment fee, but I think it's a complete scam across the board. They're basically charging you money to cross out the previous owner's name and to like write your name on the HOA docs as a new owner. Other than that, I really don't know what it's actually getting you, but sometimes it can be extremely expensive. For example, that same community I was just referencing, Daybreak, they charge 0.5% of the sales price just in an HOA transfer fee. Now, the good news is in Utah, you can negotiate who pays for that, whether the seller's gonna pay for it on your behalf, if you're gonna pay for that at closing, or if you're gonna like split it 50-50. Now, some HOA transfer fees, most of the time, honestly, are pretty inexpensive. You're talking maybe a few $100s, but just expect if you end up buying a house in an HOA community, you're also gonna have to factor in that cost. Now, you might be asking, Scott, what about solar? How much does solar cost? How much is that gonna save you? Well, I'll give you a couple personal examples. So when I helped my parents buy a house actually in Daybreak, it already had solar panels. Now, what's interesting about solar is depending on the solar company, they're oftentimes adding a lien to the property in the form of what's called the UCC1. I won't dive into the details of that. Just understand it's a totally separate loan besides your mortgage. So your mortgage would be a first position lien on the property, say, and then your solar would be a second position lien. But if you sell the house, almost always, they're gonna require someone to pay off the solar loan. Now, unless you plan on dropping $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 and just paying for the solar panels up front, most people are gonna finance that over some sort of time period, like 20 or 30 years, which means you may actually have a couple $100 a month payment just for solar. Now, in my parents' example, we had the seller pay off those solar panels at closing. So they got the benefit of having somewhat free electric bill and having solar paid off. But still, even with solar panels, they end up paying between $15 to $40 a month total in electricity. Now, what's really tricky, and this is specific to purchasing a property in Utah, so if you are interested in solar, just keep this in the back of your mind. It's not common that the solar company will allow that loan to be transferred or assumed by a new buyer. Most of the times, it's been my experience that the solar companies want that solar loan to get paid off, and they're gonna require someone to pay it off. So say, for instance, you bought a house in Utah, you got solar, but you only lived in it for a couple years and then sold it. It's more than likely you as the seller would be losing a ton of equity because you're probably gonna have to pay that off for your buyer. Now, in most cases, you have to do the math, but you probably have to own those solar panels for at least 10 years before you hit your break-even point where you actually started seeing a net positive from the money you're saving in your electric bill versus what it actually costs you to get those solar panels in the first place. Last, let's cover your overall housing expenses with your mortgage. And for most people, this is gonna be the highest cost thing that they have to factor into their budget is their overall mortgage. Now, if you paid attention to the real estate market over the last few years, a lot of people are upset about these higher interest rates, right? In the 6s and 7%. Now, if you factor that with higher priced homes, obviously it makes monthly payments much more difficult. And the affordability issue has hit Utah and the Salt Lake City market really as hard as any market in the country. So I want to do a deep dive into what to expect in terms of a monthly payment. Now, of course, this is going to vary depending on several factors, what type of loan that you're going to have, conventional, FHA, VA. There's some other loan products out there. Those are the most common. How much down payment that you're going to put, right? If you go FHA with 3.5% down, obviously your mortgage payment is going to be higher than if you put a higher down payment. And then we have to talk about interest rates themselves, right? They vary every day, just like the stock market does. And sometimes they can be a bit unpredictable. But let's factor kind of a worst case scenario of where we've seen rates over the last few years. And I'm going to give you some tips on ways that you can actually get a lower interest rate and therefore a lower monthly payment. And wrapping all those things together, your principal, your interest, taxes, and insurance, the fifth component that is often factored in is mortgage insurance. Now, a lot of our buyers that are putting less than 20% down, which is pretty much the norm, will have some form of a mortgage insurance payment that is going to be added to your overall mortgage, making it more expensive, but not necessarily going towards paying down the principal. So for instance, if you get an FHA mortgage, you're almost always going to have mortgage insurance as part of that payment, dependent upon things like debt to income ratio, credit scores, yada, yada. Even with conventional loans, if you put less than 20% down, you'll have mortgage insurance. They can oftentimes be removed once you hit the 20% equity mark, give or take. But to give you an example, I'm going to share on my screen with you how you can use a mortgage calculator like this to get an idea of what your mortgage would be if you move to Salt Lake City. So let's take a median sales price of maybe around $600,000. Now that alone might completely upset you. And if you are upset, go ahead and tell me in the comments below. But $600,000 is honestly a pretty average sales price for a single family home in Salt Lake County. And let's say you're like a lot of our buyers where you're putting maybe 5% down. That means you're financing $570,000. And rates right now vary quite a bit, but we'll use about 6.5% to make the math easy. And like I said, stick around with me for a few more minutes and I'll show you exactly how you can get a lower interest rate. All right, now let's factor in property taxes. Like we said in the beginning, it tends to be around that 0.05%, 5.5%. So $3,300, that's actually about right. Again, because you're putting less than 20% down, you might have some mortgage insurance. The way that they factor that, I won't even go into, but just know once you talk to a lender, you'll have a rough idea of how much that mortgage insurance will be. We'll just use 0.5% for now. Homeowners insurance, we'll use about $1,500. Let's say it's a conventional loan and there is no monthly HOA. That would put your monthly payment at like $4,200 a month. And that right there is a perfect reason of why so many people want to buy in Utah or want to move to Salt Lake City, but just can't quite afford a monthly payment that high. Now, we have a lot more inventory this year than we've had in really over a decade, but because of the affordability of these monthly payments, it's prevented a lot of people who would have otherwise loved to move to Utah and buy a house on the sidelines. So we'll see if that can change in the future with interest rates. But let me show you a way that even right now, you could buy a house at a lower monthly payment with a lower interest rates. What a lot of our buyers are taking advantage of right now are incentives through builders and new construction. So for instance, I'll bring Edge Homes up here on the screen. Right now, they're having an incentive that is one of the highest I think I've ever seen in the market. They're offering a 5.5% interest rate. Of course, that might vary a little bit depending on your personal finances, and 9% seller concessions. That is an insane amount. So just to give you an idea, that same purchase price of $600,000, 9% in seller concessions means that the builder is basically giving you a credit of $54,000 that could be used towards covering your standard closing costs, and then you could use the rest of it to buy down your rate like crazy, as if 5.5 isn't already a much lower rate than you would typically get in the market. Now, places like Edge Homes and other builders, they have a ton of homes in different areas, whether it's single family, townhome, condos. And oftentimes, if you've kind of maxed out with your seller concessions, you can really just take it off the purchase price and move into a brand new property with more equity at a lower rate and a lower monthly payment. And I'm going to scroll through this website just to give you an idea of the variety of different types of homes out there in different locations across Utah. I think Edge alone has probably a dozen different locations in and around the Salt Lake City area. But this is just one of many builders that are offering a really lucrative incentive to get buyers to to buy a home so that they can move their product. Now, even if you don't go new construction, you can still negotiate seller paid closing costs, we call that seller concessions, to buy down your interest rate and make that monthly payment more affordable. Now, I get it, if you're thinking about relocating to Utah, you wanna know exactly what you're getting into. How much is it gonna cost me to live here compared to maybe where you're used to? Now, there are some instances where Salt Lake City is gonna be more expensive than other markets. And then other cases like I showed you today, where it's either gonna be way lower or you're not gonna have to worry about it at all. Now, there's a reason why Utah has been ranked the #1 overall state for 3 years in a row by the US News and World Report, and why so many people want to relocate to Utah. And it's because of all the great things that you can find here that you really can't find anywhere else. And guess what? The overall cost of living, though the housing might be relatively expensive, you can probably save some costs in other departments to keep your overall monthly budget in check. And of course, Salt Lake City is also growing, so job opportunities and income growth, those are all things that we're seeing right now in the market that are likely to continue. So if you're thinking about living in Salt Lake City or you want to find out a little bit more, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can know exactly what it's like to live here. And of course, if you have questions, reach out to me. My team and I service the entire area. We'll see you in the next video.